You know, we're all haunted by stories, right? Well, I've got one. A professional phantom, you could say. She's been following me for my entire career, and she always shows up without fail whenever I hear fireworks.
And that's really what it comes down to, isn't it? A ghost, at its core, it's not some spooky creature from another dimension. It's just a story we can't shake, a narrative that we keep playing over and over in our heads, trying to make sense of something that just feels off.
You know, most lawyers, when they get haunted, it's by a case they actually argued. Something personal, right? A case they messed up. But my haunting, it's a little different. The case that just will not let me go was decided almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, my ghost name is Helen Palsgraf, and the reason this case from 1928 has latched onto me so tight, well, it's pretty simple. See, before I ever became a lawyer, I was a failed historian, and that's the key. That's why this story, this seemingly random incident with a woman on a train platform, is actually a story about how we make sense of our entire past.
All right, so let's get right into it. The case is called Palsgraf v. Long Island Railroad Company. And the facts, well, they're so simple it's almost weird. And get this, nobody has ever disputed them, not once. Okay, so picture this. You've got a man, he's carrying a package, and he's running to catch a train that's already moving. A conductor on the train gives him a little shove to help him get on board. But in that shuffle, the man drops his package. Now, nobody knew this, but the package was filled with fireworks. It hits the tracks and boom, it explodes. The shockwave from that explosion rips down the platform, knocks over this massive, heavy luggage scale, and the scale falls right on top of Mrs. Helen Palsgraf, injuring her. Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
And this is where it gets interesting. If everyone agrees on the chain of events, what on earth was there to argue about? Well, it turns out they weren't arguing about what happened. They were arguing about what it all meant. They were basically fighting over the very nature of cause and effect, of blame, of consequence. The stakes here, they weren't just about one person's injury. They were about, well, pretty much everything.
So out of this one single, totally bizarre event, you get two completely different stories. And they're told by two of the most brilliant judges of their time. And we're not just talking about two different legal opinions here. No. These were two competing histories of reality itself. And the craziest part? Both were true, and at the same time, both were kind of lies.
Okay, so in one corner, you've got Justice Benjamin Cardozo. He saw the world as a place of limits. For him, you're only responsible for people inside what he called a zone of foreseeable harm. Think of it like a bubble. If the harm is outside your bubble of what you could reasonably expect, you're not on the hook. And there's no way that conductor could have foreseen his little shove would cause an explosion. The law, Cardozo said, has to be modest. But then, in the other corner, you have Justice William Andrews. He saw a world of infinite connections. For him, every single act creates a ripple effect, like a stone in a pond, an unbroken chain. And the law's job is to follow that chain, no matter how far out those ripples go.
So Cardozo's take is super practical, right? He's basically saying, look, the world is chaotic, it's unpredictable. You just can't hold the railroad responsible for a 1 in a million freak accident. He refused to punish someone for failing to be a fortune teller, for not being able to see through the absolute chaos of real life.
But then you have Andrews in his famous dissent. He saw it totally differently. For him, the shove, the fall, the explosion, the injury, those weren't four separate things. They were one single event, an unfolding consequence, all tied together by a continuous thread. For Andrews, responsibility doesn't just hit a wall and stop. Nope, it follows that chain wherever it might lead.
So you gotta ask, how can two incredibly smart people look at the exact same set of facts and come to completely opposite conclusions? Well, it all comes down to a simple choice. Where do you start the story? If you start the story where Cardozo did, with a helpful guard just trying to get a passenger onto a train, then yeah, the whole thing feels like a bizarre, totally unpredictable accident.
But what if you start the story where Andrews did, just 75 yards down the platform? If you start the story there, you begin with a massive, heavy luggage scale that the railroad company never even bothered to bolt to the floor. And when you start there, suddenly the railroad's negligence seems totally obvious. The injury isn't a freak accident anymore. It's a foreseeable hazard just waiting to happen. See? Same facts, different starting point, completely different reality.
And this is where my past life as that failed historian comes crashing right back into the picture. Because this whole act, choosing where a story begins, shaping a messy narrative to make sense of pure chaos, well, that's not just what lawyers do. That, my friends, is history.
So how do we actually do it?
How do we take the jumbled, messy, chaotic reality of the past and impose some kind of order on it? You know, there's this fantastic little story in Umberto Eco's novel Bottolino that just nails this whole idea.
So in the book, there's this historian, Nikitas, and he's told to edit his chronicle, his history. He's specifically instructed to write that a certain group of people were Venetians, even though he knows for an absolute fact that they were from Genoa. So why lie? Well, because saying they were Venetians just makes for a cleaner, more plausible story. It tidies everything up. It forces the pure chaos of what really happened into a neat, easy-to-digest narrative.
Someone tells him that his job isn't just to write down what happened. His job is to make history make sense, to impose structure, provide stability, to allocate zones of responsibility. Sound familiar? In other words, his job is to tell the right kind of truth, the one that serves a bigger purpose, just like a judge does. So the Genoese, they become Venetians, not because they actually were, but because the story, the narrative, needed them to be. And that is why Mrs. Palsgraf haunts me. That century-old legal fight, it's a perfect parable for how we try to make sense of our own world, right here, right now. This tension between Cardozo's neat, limited world and Andrews's sprawling, interconnected one, it defines pretty much everything.
Think about it. Cardozo's world is cautious, it's sober, it has boundaries. It accepts that you can't predict the fireworks. But Andrew's world? That's expansive. It's kind of terrifyingly interconnected, where the consequences of one tiny action can just spread and spread forever. And here's the massive dilemma we all face. We live in Cardozo's world. We live in chaos and unpredictability. But our incredibly dense, complex, modern society forces us to govern as if we live in Andrew's world, demanding that we see every connection, that we foresee every single consequence.
So what's the bottom line? It's this. Whether we're talking about a court ruling or a history textbook, what we're actually doing is telling a story. We are editing reality. We're snipping away the messy, chaotic bits, and we're choosing a narrative that forces order, that forces causality, that forces meaning onto a universe that, frankly, often has none of those things.
And that, right there, is the question that my ghost, Helen Palsgraf, leaves me with. It's the question that follows me every time I read about the past or try to make sense of what's happening today. I always have to ask myself, and so I'll leave you with this same question. When you look out at the world, are you really seeing the raw, chaotic facts of what's happening? Or are you seeing the cleaner, more plausible story that someone else wanted you to see?